Okay, so this is a response video to the guy who's talking about different types of preppers and survival types and people in different walks of life who, may not be ex-military, may not have a bunch of assault rifles or what he feels are the proper numbers and kinds of assault rifles to keep around for WROL or SHTF or whatever. And I'm going to talk about some situations I know of happening currently, happening in the past. First, we're going to talk about Africa. Okay, I have some friends and family who travel back and forth to Africa, and some people I met back in the 80s when I first got into the survivalism thing, who had worked in Africa in the late 70s, early 80s in what used to be a country called Rhodesia. And if anybody recognizes this camo pattern right here, that's one of the Rhodesian camo patterns. Now these guys were a military unit that was so famous or infamous, depending on what you call it, that they were under international trade sanctions. And as a uniform, what they did was they got these Hawaiian shirt prints made up in South Africa, and then they would add epaulets to them, which is a little those little shoulder things, so that they could wear the ranks on them. And then when they wore the shirts the rest of the time, they didn't put insignia or anything on them. And that, even though it kind of looks like a Hawaiian shirt, was actually their uniform shirt for a unit that was so elite and so infamous that possession of one of these shirts in Zimbabwe is an instant death penalty offense, because these guys were hardcore. And one of these guys, who I met back in, I'd say about 86, 87, worked security for rich folks in Florida and some of the private communities, and occasionally he had gotten certified in law enforcement. He had a Class 3 weapons license. His idea of a good time was to go to the beach with a silenced MAC-10 and throw food to seagulls and shoot them. So every once in a while, I saw him, oddly enough, working as a lifeguard, wearing sweats and carrying a briefcase, whenever they thought too many violent Cubans were going to the beaches in the nice private resort areas. And you know what? If, this was back in the 80s when a lot of that stuff you see on Miami Vice, reruns of Miami Vice, that shit was really going down. Okay, and it was going down on a daily basis in Florida back in the 80s. And so this guy who was in a unit called the Selous Scouts, who he was one of the few Americans who had been in that. Most of them were natives of Africa, usually, and it was a mix of white and black Africans in that unit. This guy was a straight-up mercenary. He was a straight-up killer. And they hired him to work security at a lot of these wealthy private communities because those people, they were good at making money. They didn't want the legal liability of handling their own dirty work. And they had a bunch of violent, mean Cuban dope dealers having conflicts with each other and thinking they were going to get into the kidnap for ransom business with these rich folks' kids. That was a mistake for a few of them. They ended up floating in the bay every once in a while. And so Paul the mercenary, anyway, he taught me a few cool things, and I ended up with one of these shirts kind of as a souvenir for a little bit of actually handyman work I did for the guy. But the thing is, the guy was hardcore. And when shit hits the fan, WROL, okay, not everybody's going to be good at defending themselves. Now, at about that same period, I was working in actually I was working in a restaurant. I was doing handyman work on the side. And I was in a military cadet organization that we were fortunate enough to do some cross-training with Special Forces people. And these guys were out of Brooksville, Florida, 20th Special Forces Group, and we did a cross-training exercise once where they were teaching my group a bunch of survival skill type stuff, and they brought their kids along. And these guys were really proud of the fact that they were teaching combat and survival skills to their kids. And in one of the exercises, we were using a fire tower as a rappelling tower. And, you know, I mean, it's kind of one of those courage things that teenagers want to do when you can't jump out of airplanes or rappel out of helicopters. You'd rappel off of a tower. And so that's what we were doing. And these guys wanted to train their kids to be commandos too. And one of them had a 9-year-old daughter with long blonde hair, you know, and their idea was to embarrass the wannabe guys like me and the teenagers. You know, hey, look what we can teach our kids to do. We can teach anybody. Well, we went on so we did the rappelling thing. And partway through the rappelling exercise, you know, I'm trying to learn everything I can from these special forces guys, kind of picking their brains on their thoughts on guns and knives and all that cool shit. I hear this blood-curdling scream coming from partway up the rappelling tower. I look up, and about 20 feet up, there's this girl with her hair tangled in the carabiner, screaming because her hair was tangled in the carabiner, and she was hanging by partly her hair, and probably hoping that most of her scalp would stay attached to her head, which was in danger of not staying attached to her head. And so these guys are climbing up the rappelling tower, knife in teeth, no joke. The guy was climbing up the rappelling tower with his knife in his teeth so he could cut his daughter free of the screwed up rappelling rope with her hair all in the carabiner. And, you know, I'm going to say this as an example that not everybody can be the commando, okay? And you can throw high quality training at some people and they're still not going to be a commando, all right? And in a shit-hit-the-fan situation, if you can get a hold of a Selous scout, okay, and you're rich and you can afford this guy, you're going to have some damn good protection, okay? And if, you know, you would afford a guy like me or something like that, well, that would be another matter. But the thing is, you know, let's look at something in WRL, shit-hit-the-fan, all that kind of stuff. There are people that no matter how much training and equipment you put in their hands, they're not going to be commandos, okay? And that's reality, all right? A lot of these grass-eating hippie types, you know, maybe they weren't cut out for the military to begin with, but they still want, need, deserve, and they have a right to purchase protection in WRL or shit hit the fan. Now, there was a guy I met, he was from Texas. When I went to a security school for an outfit that did bodyguard work in Iraq. And this was a shirt, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, an outfit called the International Training Group, part of another security outfit called the SEAL Foundation. This is the guy's card. I fold it in half so that I'm going to maintain his anonymity. He was an ex-cop who did a lot of work in Texas and Mexico. Legally in Texas, he's fully licensed as an armed guy in Texas. In Mexico, it was one of those come to an understanding with the local authorities situations. And in those types of WROL situations, that means without rule of law. It means the law isn't really ruling, but there are still people somewhat in control. And under those circumstances, a person demonstrating that they had sufficient training, sufficient knowledge, it looked like this guy was a bodybuilder, he looked like he was in shape, he looked, sounded, talked like he knew what he was doing, and could practice good business ethics. Okay, so a lot of people talk about, you know, what's their favorite camo for shit hit the fan? You know, is it going to be your status symbol, fashionable, exotic military camo like the Selous Scout shirt? Maybe you want to do the Hawaiian shirt thing. Maybe you want to have digital camo or something like that on your stuff. Hey, how about this? How about just plain security guard? Okay, now I could tell you that when SHTF wages go down, okay, and I can hire somebody. Other people can hire me, okay? And if you want to be prepared for both SHTF and WRL and recovery survival, think about this, okay? Years ago, I went and got this stack of stuff and documentation to show, my qualifications. These are some weapon and security qualifications. They're all expired now. This one was for, I think, OC spray or something back in California when you had to have a permit for it. Military ID card that I would show just to show, yeah, I was actually in the military. DD-214, I would keep that around to show my actual qualifications on stuff. here's a first aid, first responder, CPR, AED certification, okay? Why would you keep these kind of documents around for WROL, SHTF? Well, you know, you do have those grass-eating rich folk, the Mother Earth News types, where, you know, they never wanted to be in the military. They never wanted to be a commando. They never wanted to be a cop, but they have learned how to be economically viable under all circumstances. And for their survival, they're willing to pay for services like security. Like the guy who has given this business card right here, he works in Mexico. He's a bodyguard for rich people in Mexico. And are all of those people going to carry their own guns and do their own dirty work if it becomes necessary? No, they're not. Okay? And a well-prepared survivalist can look at being a security operations guy as an option. Now, there was a guy that I knew. I don't know if he would have called himself a survivalist, but you know, back when I went and got the training up, this shirt guy was, you know, hardcore guy. His name was Wolf Weiss. Chuck Weiss. I met him briefly in the Marine Corps, then heard that through a circle of people that he was hiring for convoy security over in Iraq. And was, you know, he did work with Red Cross and a lot of aid organizations that they didn't want to do their own dirty work. Okay, they had humanitarian aid people who wanted to deliver food to the poor and needy in Iraq, and they hired hardcore guys to do the protection for that. And so he had a crew that did that. They hired Gurkhas for, I don't know, a couple hundred a day for the Gurkhas. And in SHTF, WROL, think about this. Think about maintaining certain documentation that shows the level of training, your weapons, all that kind of stuff. You know, I could go into certain places, especially internationally, where you can't carry weapons internationally. You tell somebody my weapon and equipment requirements, and they'd get it handled, and I would be working, okay? And that's because I can go in and I can show certain types of documentation. Now, because of my circumstance, I probably would not go in a place that is a rule of law situation without full permission of the law. Under a WROL situation, like this guy working in Mexico, it is not a rule of law situation. It is a rule of whoever happens to be in control. And who happens to be in control of an area, a lot of times, still becomes a situation of the consent of the governed. And people will consent to governance on the part of people who will maintain the economic viability of a region. People will consent to being controlled by those who get them paid and fed and clothed and housed and all of those things. And under those circumstances, they will pay for people to protect that. And that is a valid choice for survival for those who either can't, won't, or don't want to be their own do-it-yourself commando, okay, who want to hire maybe the South African mercenary or the Iraq war vet or the ex-cop to be a bodyguard. It's a valid option for shit hit the fan for people to hire security. It's a valid option for WRL to have hired guns, okay, and it's not an evil thing. And so for the Mother Earth News crowd, if they have made a lot of steps for themselves to be economically viable in a WRL, SHTF, off-grid situation, it is valid to hire professional security or even semi-professional security without getting blackmailed into it. And I can tell you that from a business ethics standpoint, the guy whose this business card came from, he does well because he practiced good business ethics, okay? Do I personally think he was practicing the best business ethics in the world? No. But, you know, that becomes a business situation where the guy who practices the best business ethics and gives the best service for the money is going to be the guy who eats, I'll tell you that right now. He's going to be the guy who survives probably a little better than the one who thinks he's going to use his guns and knives to be a robber. All right, and believe me, for Y2K, I'll tell you a little bit about my Y2K prep story and some of the mistakes and pitfalls that were made on some of that and some of the ways I dealt with it.